Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. We're doing a special election integrita issue today, and with me is Houman Hamadi. Hello.
Hello. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. Hey, so recently, we've been talking offline, and also we interact on X quite a bit. And I noticed about a week or so ago, you put up a post which just was very interesting. You said you had just finished an insightful visit to the massive new LA County Ballot Processing Center. There's a picture of you in the processing center. So, over the last, 8 years or so, at various times, people on both sides of the aisle have questioned election integrity, right? Mm-hmm. So, the first time around, you had Hillary Clinton running around calling Trump an illegitimate president. 4 years later, on the other side, there were people who had doubts about the 2020 election, thinking that it was rigged. So I know it would motivate me to go and inspect the chocolate factory and go in and try to see, how does it work on the inside? What sort of led to you making this visit? And then we'll talk about the details of what you found there. So that was the origin of this.
Absolutely. It's actually an interesting story. It's one that impacted me directly. I did not come at this from the perspective of being a conspiracy theorist, election denier, someone who didn't trust the voting system. I know there have always been issues like the lack of voter ID and several other and mail-in ballots for everyone. But I generally came in with a position of trust. And then what happened the other week is that I live in Santa Monica, and Santa Monica, California and Malibu, California share a school district, even though they aren't geographically together. It's an old historic fluke. The two districts are actually in the middle of a very messy divorce right now for reasons unrelated to this. But what's interesting is that because they're geographically distinct, the two cities within that district have different bond districts. So Santa Monica-based voters only vote on bonds to construct schools or fix schools in Santa Monica, and the same for Malibu. On this upcoming November ballot, there were two different ballot measures, Measure QS for Santa Monica and Measure MM for Malibu. Then the ballots arrived, and it turns out that both of those cities had both of those ballot measures on the printed ballots that showed up to 100% of the voters. That's not right, and that should not have happened. Each group should have received a ballot that only had the opportunity to vote for the measure that was relevant to its own district. And so, there was
Santa Monica has Santa Monica stuff, and Malibu has Malibu stuff.
Because if we vote on Malibu, on MM, that vote would be added to the legitimate votes and actually ruin the count, which is not right. Imagine Michigan voting for California races or vice versa. That sort of thing is not supposed to happen. There was supposed to be a process going on to really validate these and make sure, based on proofs, that these were totally correct before being sent for final printing. And that didn't happen clearly. And so what happened next is what caused some alarm in me as well as many others. And that was the fact that we assumed that they were going to say, you know what, we're going to invalidate this measure and have to run it in a separate election or another election in the future. Or we're just going to have to remail new ballots only for this group. But that's not what they did. What they said instead, and they reiterated that in an email sent just this afternoon, is that don't worry, just vote for the one that you're supposed to vote for. And if you don't and vote for the other one, we're just going to count and certify the votes that you should have voted for. So if Santa Monica votes on Malibu, they're not going to count those Malibu votes from Santa Monica people and vice versa. And that's what got me to wonder, how in the world is that possible?
Yeah, so just to be very clear, because I want to make sure everyone is following this along. So they decided to fix it in post, if you will, right? So
exactly.
Instead of mailing out new ballots, they said, oh, okay, we'll just let everybody, let both cities vote on both measures. But if you live in Santa Monica, we will ignore whatever you voted on for Malibu. And if you live in Malibu, we'll ignore whatever you did in Santa Monica. Yes. And that made you think, oh, my God, how are they doing that, right? That's what led to this?
Yeah, I didn't even think that was possible.
Yeah. Because you're like, okay, so now if they have the power to sort of post facto edit, votes, what does that mean? And what does that power extend to? Do we know whether they're doing this in other instances? If they've done it in the past, what could they do in the future? Right. So that's where your brain goes, right?
Exactly.
So we're on the same page. Okay. So you decided to go and visit the facility. So first of all, how did you get access? Like, I can't just go into the Willy Wonka voting machine factory, right? But you can. So how did that happen? And then we'll talk about what you saw when you went inside.
So first, what I learned, to my surprise, is that yes, anyone can go there, and they in fact built the new facility to design it in such a way that makes it easy for people to visit and inspect, and you can stay there for as long as you want. And they built it in a way that can accommodate a large number of visitors. The walls of the place are made in glass. So you can look in to the ballot tabulation machines from the outside without even going in and physically potentially tampering with it. But everything else, even from the secure location, you can look, from the unsecure location, you can look inside the secure location. And they even let you go up very close to where the physical handling of the ballots is, where the people are manually reviewing and making sure they're okay. So there is a process on their website for the Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder's Office, where if you are in LA County, I think you may need an appointment, or even if you don't, you may just be able to show up. But even on all the way through election night, you are physically allowed to be there. When I looked in the sign-in sheet, I saw that there were people from like the LA GOP who were visiting, and from news organizations, etc. So there is some transparency, and they have like several live streamed cameras that you can watch as long as they're open for business, sometimes even late into the night, that you can watch a lot of these activities. They don't have audio, but at least there's some video, some of it zoomed out, that you can see what's going on in that facility. It's nice, but not quite as good as being on the ground. But what happened is, when I made an initial post on X regarding my concern over how they're going to edit this in post, as you said, the head of that organization, Dean Logan, who runs the LA County Registrar Recorder's Office, and is someone who's had some controversy multiple times in his past, reached out to me via direct message on X saying, I'd like to invite you to come and visit, and I will personally give you a tour. And there was no way I wasn't going to take him up on that, because that was an opportunity for me to get a very inside view, going behind all the security areas, and to have a chance to ask him questions and drill down into some of my concerns, which I think many other people share as well.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the facility itself is built for physical transparency, based on what you just said.
Yes.
And that's actually new information to me. And that's very heartening, because I think one of the things we all recalled from the 2020 elections were the images on TV of them, sort of boarding up or papering up the windows, right? Yeah. And then the accusations of, that they shut down the voting in the middle of the night, and then there was a broken pipe, and then at 4 a.m. they started up again, but nobody was there. So this sounds like the new facility, at least, is built in a way to allay those concerns, or at least make it more transparent physically.
Correct. The physical transparency is off the charts in that facility, and it's massive.
Yeah,
this is several football fields in size, all indoors under one room. They don't have partitions. The only partitioned area is the one room where the actual scanning of the ballots occurs at the very end of that process. And that is still a glass encased room within that gigantic cavernous room that all the other activities happen in.
So that would be the room where they've actually got the completed and certified ballots, and they're feeding it into a machine. Is it
Correct.
That room? Okay.
Correct.
So we can see into that room. So if somebody feeds one ballot in and then it comes out and they feed it right back in again, we would see that, right? Because that would be a physical act, right?
You would presumably be able to see it.
Okay, that's good. That's great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, well, first of all, what geographic region does this facility cover? It's just LA County?
It's all of Los Angeles County, but LA County is vast. So remember, that includes like Catalina Island, where they have to use helicopters or boats, includes some of these remote mountain regions where they do always have to use helicopters to bring in the ballots. And it includes a very wide geographic area where they have, I saw the parking lot and I saw the vans coming and going, an entire, I don't know how many vans are, it's a huge fleet of these white vans that have the county logo on them that are going all day, every day throughout election season, emptying those ballot drop boxes, putting them in these gray duffel bags and transporting them physically to the ballot processing center.
Wow. Okay. So what sort of software are they using? Did you get any insight into that?
Yes. So that was one of my questions, because once I saw the actual physical process, it was quite reassuring, as much as it could be, without, sitting there for hours and, inspecting their signature verification process in detail, which I obviously didn't have time to do, as well as how they hand verify that the ballots are authentic and how they remake ballots that have problems. Aside from that, I asked, what does happen after the ballots are scanned? And so the answer that I got from Dean Logan is that the ballots are scanned all the way through Election Day, but it is not until the end of Election Day that the ballots can be tabulated or tallied, right? So they don't count the votes. They scan them into a machine, and then the machine runs its software to actually calculate, right, and tally up how many votes each different thing got on the ballot. And that cannot happen until Election Day is over. However, what I asked them about next was, well, what is the software you use to do this? And his answer was, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's almost a direct quote, is like, well, we wrote our own software and we own it.
Wow. So they rolled their own.
That was the basically verbatim language that I got.
Okay, so it's not like Dominion or some of these other things, or Smartmatic or some of these other things we've heard. It is custom-built software that they wrote themselves for LA County. So, and we don't really know much about that because it's home-rolled software. So, yeah, because when I think about these things, the counting software is the black box. We know, I mean, as the public, you and me and the general public, we know nothing at all about what's going on inside of that software. And I did look up before the show, Dominion and others, at least Dominion for sure, their software is not open source. So, and they say the reason for that is for security and also for their trade secrets. And I look at that, and as an engineer at heart and by training, and a software guy and a blockchain guy, I like things that are open source. Bitcoin is all the code for Bitcoin is open source, and it is very secure. Linux, operating system is open source. Anyone can inspect the code. That is very secure. That runs the majority of the world's computers. So obfuscation of source code does not lend greater security. And in fact, in many cases, it works against it because, if you have the eyes of the whole world looking at your source code, the whole world is much more likely to find a potential problem than just your team of engineers, right? So
that is true.
So it can be like super helpful, right? So, I feel like the way these things should work is the software itself should be open source, and it should be cryptographically sealed with a hash of the code to make sure that the version that's running on the machines on Election Day is in fact the same version that was inspected by the public, right? So the hash should match, right? And you can easily do that. So I don't know why these things aren't open source. It feels to me like they should be. And I also think the security argument is bad. I think so that leaves like trade secrets, but I'm like, dude, you're counting stuff. Like this is not like,
and it's a government entity. There's no trade secret for a government entity. The government is actually owned by the people. So when you think about it, if anything, we're the shareholders of the government, and they should share it with the shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. We should demand this. So, when I think about it, it just like makes my blood boil that these are fixable problems. These doubts that many have had about both elections on both sides. These are fixable problems. Yeah. Truth is mathematically provable now. We could make this stuff go away, in about a year if we really just decided to get serious about it, right? So,
100% agree.
Yeah. So Hash Rate is sponsored by Ledger. With the announcement of Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, Ledger gives you the best security on the planet for your crypto and identity. Ledger Flex and Stacks drive an e-ink screen with the same secure chip that's in your credit card and passport, except instead of protecting the secrets of banks and governments, Ledger protects your secrets, your private keys. Ledger supports Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more than 200 other tokens. The secure touchscreen, plus the Ledger Live app, means that whether you're buying your very first Bitcoin or doing your 2000th swap, you can do it securely and easily with your Ledger. And as always, use my link, shop.ledger.com/hashrate in the show notes to get the very best price whenever you buy a Ledger Flex or Stacks. OpNet is the ultimate solution for deploying smart contracts directly onto the Bitcoin blockchain. leveraging its security and stability. As a meta protocol, OpNet allows you to run Ethereum-style smart contracts on any UTXO-based blockchain, including Bitcoin and fractal Bitcoin. With OpNet, there's no need to rewrite your existing smart contracts from scratch. Simply deploy them on OpNet, and you're live on Bitcoin or fractal with no modifications required. Start your journey on OpNet today by visiting opnet.org. So when they do something like fixing it in post, the way you described for Santa Monica and Malibu, is there a report that is publicly available detailing what they did after the fact, so we all know, or is that not?
That wasn't made clear to me. It doesn't seem like that. It was more of a, don't worry, we'll just handle it, and we'll just give you the certified results based on what is certified. And I would love to trust that process. The problem is that I just naturally, as a scientist, I'm a skeptic. Right. And I'd like to trust but verify, but I don't think there is an opportunity to verify. And that's where the problem is. Had I not seen this problem with the mixed up ballots occurring, I don't think this would be on my radar at all, because I would just, like most people, just go and vote and not think about it. But the fact that it is possible to go in to what's supposed to be a locked database after the fact and make modifications in however it's processed, is cause for concern. I work in clinical trials, and in the clinical trials world, the FDA has tons of regulations that actually force you to lock your clinical trial database. It's called a DBL, database lock. And once database lock occurs, you cannot go in and change anything. You can't change the data. You can't change how the data is processed. You can't say, I'm going to add this analysis after the fact, after you've seen the data. For example, after the trial's been unblinded. Why? Because they don't want you to rig the outcomes of a clinical trial. That ruins the whole thing, right? The whole point is to wait and see the data based on your pre-specified endpoints. Here, we have pre-specified endpoints, but they're saying, well, since we did the ballots wrong, we're going to go back in after the database is locked and tweak a couple of things with the analysis, and don't worry because it's okay. And I get it. However, where is that occurring, and who is the person controlling that, and how do we know that they don't have the ability, even if it's one rogue employee, by the way? I'm not even suggesting a systematic issue, but how do we know that a rogue employee can't go in and tweak things that are invisible to anyone, including their own boss?
Did you get a sense of how open-ended this ability to tweak the ballots actually is? Is it like constructing a query for a database where, effectively, if you know how to construct the logic of the query, you can kind of do anything you want to the data? Did you ask that question, or did you get some sense
I tried, but I think it was basically a very basic answer, which is we have our own system and trust us, it works just fine. And that's the question that needs to be answered. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So who are they hiring? Who are these people that are actually working there? Did you get a sense of that?
So there are around 800 employees in the facility at its peak. And I asked who they are, and these are all seasonal employees. They're not counting and processing ballots year round all year. So it's only during election seasons. They have a smaller crew up front when ballots start going out, and especially as they start trickling in. But as election season kicks in, more and more people start working, and their hours get longer and longer until they're working even overnight to process them. And the processing is actually not a very easy process, right? They come in through the loading dock via USPS or via those ballot drop boxes. So they have that network of vans. From there, they go to a machine that reads, scans the signatures and compares the signature on the outside of the envelope to whatever signature is on file for the voter whose ID is on the outside of the ballot envelope. And then if it passes that, it goes from there to a machine that opens the envelope. And then from there, it goes to another person, and there's a huge bank of people just literally sitting there with a red bin, a yellow bin, and a green bin, and they manually inspect each ballot to make sure that it's a valid ballot and it was properly filled out. So if you use purple crayon and you circled the answer rather than using a black ink to bubble the box, that, for example, would be one that may end up in the yellow bin, where it can be remade later, and I'll talk about that. If, however, it was last year's ballot or they put a comic book in there or something, obviously that's totally unfixable. That goes in the red bin. Anything that's green goes straight from there to the scanner, or at least it's held for a little while early in election season, and it ultimately goes to the scanner. The things in the yellow bin, I followed those, and they go to an area that says ballot remake, and they literally remake the ballots there. So they create a new ballot, and then there's a person who's supposed to look at the voter's ballot and literally just bubble in what it looked like they were supposed to fill in on their intended ballot. It was a little weird to see. I had no idea that they remake ballots.
That is a little weird, right? Because you said remaking. I heard you say remake ballots earlier, and I was like, well, what is that? That sounds like maybe a hole, right? So, okay, so basically remaking a ballot is you've got what looks like a legit ballot, but it's screwed up in some way. And so you have someone there who makes a copy of that ballot and tries to correct it as best they can. They try to reconstruct, almost like archaeology, like, what they think that it should be. Right.
Yes.
So, okay.
And in most cases, it's like torn or something, and it can't go through the scanner because it's shriveled up or torn or something. And it could be something a little more egregious than that. Whatever the case may be, they're supposed to try their best. What I understood is that there's supposed to be a second person who reviews it afterwards to ensure it was done properly. But when there's such a massive volume, obviously things can go wrong.
Yeah, well, it does sound. I mean, I have to say, I'm somewhat heartened by much of what I'm hearing here. Mm-hmm. That I think that probably by and large, a lot of these measures they sound pretty good. They sound as good as anything could be. And especially if there are observers who are able to watch every aspect of all these things and sort of check the work on all this. What is this? So can someone observe every step of the way, everything that goes on here? At more or less all times. Okay.
No, they actually encourage it. When I showed up, and they were specifically expecting me, so I got quite a nice welcome. But they're a welcoming group of people, and they have processes for everyone to come in, and you have to watch a video about the process, and you can't have your phone and take videos. You're not supposed to talk to the people who are doing it, and you're certainly not supposed to interrupt the process for obvious reasons. However, they do encourage people to come, and they can accommodate a very large number of visitors. And I think on their website, they have an email you can email to arrange a visit. And I can't remember if they allow pop-in visits unannounced. They might actually, but they have quite a good setup over there. And like I said, they're set up for it. And most people are, I certainly was unaware. You were unaware. And I think the vast majority of people had no clue that this is a place that is built for observation. And I think everyone who's interested should go out and observe.
How new is this place? It sounds like it's completely new.
I think it's like a year old or less than a year old.
Yeah, okay.
It used to be an old Fry's electronics store, and then shut down. It got mothballed, and the street address is still like Fry's Avenue or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, so let's talk about duplication. So, in Bitcoin, we famously have the solved double spend problem to make sure that we don't spend the same coin twice. In this election process, how do we know that the same ballots aren't being counted twice? Did you get any sense of that?
Yeah, I asked about that. Each ballot has its unique ID. And so the scanner is basically supposed to, or the software, in post scan is supposed to ignore duplicate ballots. So I don't know how the process works, but that's how they set it up to me that it works. So you're technically not supposed to be able to vote twice.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds like that probably is pretty good.
Yes.
Okay. So the other big hole that has been talked about a lot over the last couple of years, especially, is not really election or vote counting fraud, but registration fraud, where people who don't exist, or they're dead, or they've moved, or they're illegal, they're not supposed to be in the United States. Mm-hmm. Those people end up somehow getting a ballot and voting. And by and far, the theories that I've heard about how elections could be rigged, if they're being rigged, is it's really registration fraud, where these extra ballots kind of come out of nowhere. We're not checking IDs. There are a lot of measures that we're not making that make it somewhat easy, I think, to commit registration fraud. Did you get a sense of how this facility was mitigating against that possibility?
Yeah, I don't think it goes very far, but what they said is that if there are ballots that go out to someone who's deceased, for example, or someone who hasn't lived in an apartment building or a house for a while and they've moved but didn't update their address, they count on someone sending that back to them rather than trashing that ballot for that person to be adjusted or taken off the rolls. If it doesn't come back to them, they don't know, because they don't send you a message every year saying, hey, have you changed your address? Are you still alive? Please click here, and verify or update your address. They don't do that. And so because of that, they require active notification of that by whoever receives that ballot. Now, is that happening? I highly doubt it, because I think these things end up in the trash or wherever. But it looks like a lot of them don't come back to them in the return mail. And then I asked, what would happen if someone filled out a ballot that was for someone else that showed up to their address just so they could vote multiple times under different names? And they said, well, the signature verification is supposed to handle that. My only issue with that is, how good is the signature verification, right? My own signature has probably evolved somewhat since I last registered to vote forever ago. I have no idea, how they've accurately compared my signature now versus before and still allowed my ballot to go through. And if it does that and allows my ballot to go through, how is it that, you can be certain that it's rejecting signatures that are fake?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Just today we had, I don't know if you saw this yet, because it just happened within the last few hours on X, breaking. Lancaster, Pennsylvania officials have busted a large-scale fraudulent voter registration scheme that includes thousands of applications with the same handwriting, fake signatures, false addresses, etc. And there was the Attorney General of I believe all of Pennsylvania basically was giving a press conference talking about how they had discovered this registration fraud, and it was actually the handwriting that tipped them off. They're like, wait a minute, all these ballots are in the same handwriting? That can't be right. Right. So it was literally that. But this is the first time I've heard of something like this being caught red-handed, and I'm actually heartened that it was caught kind of in advance, right? Because if it's thousands of fraudulent, fraudulent voter registrations, depending on how close the election is, that is enough to maybe tip the whole state, which might be enough to tip the election.
Could be in a state like Pennsylvania. And that's a great concern. Here's the problem with things like this. Here's the problem with the issue that happened to our ballots in Santa Monica, is that any of these episodes is enough to slightly or even majorly erode voter confidence. What happens when people lose confidence in the process just because they have very reasonable concerns or doubts about the integrity or quality of the process? Sometimes they don't vote because they think, well, my vote's not going to matter anyway. And what happens is that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because those people who don't vote, if there are enough of them, that in and of itself impacts the outcome of elections. And I think we need to have systems in place. It's now abundantly clear that we need to have very robust systems on a national level in place to ensure that people can trust the process. And right now, it's clear that there are no national standards for what we do with voting and counting ballots. There are not. And so the federal government has yet to dictate to states, oh, we will only count votes if you check ID, if you, verify signatures in such a manner, if you clean your voter rolls of deceased people or non-citizens every 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, whatever, et cetera. But they, even address verification, but that hasn't been happening. And I think this is an opportunity, hopefully after this election and once the dust settles, for us to really have a national conversation around what needs to be done. Not talking about voter ID in the context of what happened historically in the past, right? We have to acknowledge in the past, yes, voter ID back in the 60s and whatnot in certain parts of the country was used in order to exclude people of certain races from voting. Because back then, yes, it was absolutely the fact that people did have challenges getting IDs. But today, 2024, especially in places like California where anyone off the street can get an ID, that's no longer a fact, right? That's not a concern. So things have evolved and we can't just stay in the past. In fact, acknowledging what happened in the past can be part of this discussion. We can learn from it. We can teach the younger generations about what had happened in the past so they can learn a historic lesson. But at the same time, acknowledge that in 2024, with all the technology that we have, we can make voting safer and more accessible for everyone and make it, in fact, a much more trusting process so that more people would be encouraged to participate in the process.
Yeah, no, I think you make many good points there. I remember seeing a video on X where somebody went around New York City talking to black people and said, so is it hard for you to get an ID? And the black people are like, what are you even talking about? And they got kind of pissed. They're like, well, you think we're stupid? Like, that's racist. To think we can't get an ID is itself racist, right? Yeah. So I think you're right. Like, it's just sort of that should not be an argument in this day and age.
You don't see people outside of bars not being let in because they don't have an ID, right? Right. Like, there's no bar on earth, or at least in this country, that has a line of people outside who are begging to be let in because they don't have an ID and can't get one. It's not happening.
Yeah, it's not a legit concern. So after we started talking a little bit about this topic, in my mind, I started trying to design what the ideal voting scenario is. I mean, what I don't like about this is I don't know whether the elections in 2016 or 2020 were legit. I don't know. I have my guesses, but and everybody's got their guesses. Some people are like, no, it was the most secure ever. Don't question it. And other people are like, no, it was definitely rigged. Blah 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 blah. And really, neither one of them is correct, right? Or neither one of them know for sure that their point of view is correct. And we should, and that's really the problem. It's like we should not be in this position where there's any question at any point in this process whatsoever. We can know. It is possible to make a system that is rig proof, that we know 100% is legit, and there would never be arguments over whether the election was rigged ever again. It would just go away, right? So I started looking into how would you go about doing this, and I'll give you sort of 10,000 foot view, and of course my solution includes blockchain. So just imagine a system where it's electronic and paper up front, and we're sure the registrations are correct, and we're sure that the votes are counted correctly, or they're at the moment that they're tallied and actually counted, not loaded into the system but counted. That is registered on a blockchain, and so basically the participants in the election, after being KYC'd via ID, which I do think we should have, you receive a token, a crypto token, and that gives you the right to vote once. So you fill out your ballot, and electronically or via paper, and that crypto token is what you spend to vote. That actually moves your ballot into the tally, and at that point, the blockchain keeps account of who's voted for who or what, and that tally is inspectable by anyone. So it's just like a block explorer on Bitcoin or Ethereum, where all of us at any time can go and look and see the current state of the election. It's in a state of perpetual public audit. Yeah, everyone can see everything at any time, and so we don't have to go to NBC to see what the tallies are. We can just go look. Yes. And if we want to go audit it and sort of track what happened where, anyone can go do that. And you don't have to be a government official. The citizens can go and inspect these things. And I think that where was I going with this? The other big point about this is that the votes are still anonymous. So it's not like your ID is associated with it. Even though there's a public ledger of the voting, it's still fully anonymous. You don't know who voted, just that there were votes. So what is your sort of when you think about the ideal way to do this? What goes through your mind? How would you design the ideal system?
Well, I'll tell you, when I went to sign up my kids for Cub Scout, potluck, I had to create an account. I had to use my email. I had to do 2-factor authentication. And this is just to sign up, to bring watermelons or juice to this potluck. And I'm not kidding. So that has right there far more security involved, right? We had 2-factor authentication than voting does, right? And right now, I think between the technologies of really basic 2-factor authentication or just even emails and passwords all the way through blockchain, or perhaps even a combination of those, we can do that. And the same can be replicated in paper format, right? At least, for people who don't have devices or elderly don't know how to use them, there's still ways to create things that are coded. That crypto token, for example, could be on a piece of paper or via barcode or something. There are ways to do that so that the analog and digital could be merged. And right now, even, one thing we didn't talk about is, to my surprise, I always thought that voting machines, when you go to vote in person, are actually electronically tallying those results. But that is not the case. It turns out that when you electronically vote, it prints out a paper, and that paper goes into a box. That box is physically transported to the ballot processing center, and those pieces of paper, which are your ballots, now go through that physical scanner. And so even that process is not fully digital, even though it could be. And in some ways that's more secure. And in some ways it creates an opportunity, for things to get physically lost, or for there to be some kind of manipulation down the line. And so there are a lot of question marks here.
Yeah, the sort of chain of custody becomes somewhat questionable once it goes from electronic to paper. But I think the reason why they do that is the machines are not connected to the internet, or they're not supposed to be, right? So, and I don't know how we verify that. Again, that's another thing we can't know. They're like, trust us. And somehow those machines get operating system and application updates, to the software that runs on them, be it Dominion or the Homeworld stuff. So there must be some sort of disk drive or a connection at some point, perhaps not during the actual election night, but it must exist, right? So what does the management of that look like? What is the chain of custody of those connections? What does that look like? And is that logged? And how can we know that? And right now we don't know, right?
Yeah, for that, I actually have less of a concern. And here's why. Because you get to see that paper that's spit out, right? It gives it back to you. You get to inspect it before turning that in. And so from that perspective, I have the least concern. And what came out of this process, by the way, for me, speaking of in-person versus mail-in, is that I got to kind of see what happens to these ballots, right? With the mail-in, I walked you through that entire process, and there are multiple touch points for each ballot, from the signature verification that's done by machine and ultimately by human if there's a problem, to the robot that opens the envelope, to a human who goes and validates your ballot before it goes to the scanner, right? And that human sees who you voted for. So there are opportunities there, right, for someone, again, who's nefarious or just doesn't know what they're doing to create a problem, right? The in-person ballots go straight to the scanner because they've already been validated. There's no error there. And so for me, I'm voting in person because I want to have as few human touch points as possible, because each time it is touched by a human or a robot, what's happening? There's an opportunity for some kind of error. And I'd rather avoid all that and just have something that I can look at and know that that's what's going through the scanner.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing that always runs through my mind is something Elon brought up recently with respect to government regulations. He says, he famously says there's no garbage collection for regulations. So all we get are more and more regulations. And sometimes the regulations start conflicting with one another. Sometimes they were, made in 1850 and it doesn't apply, but for some weird reason, it's still applying to me and, reducing my ability to produce a product. And he says, we don't have an entity which looks back through time and gets rid of these things and prunes them when they are damaging or no longer necessary or actively just bad. And in software, we with object-oriented programming, we do have memory management and garbage collection built into the operating system and built into the language. So if you come from a technology background, these stranded bits of data that just are useless and taking up space in the computer, collecting them is a big deal because you don't want that slowing down your computer. So you do have significant resources running around, freeing all that memory back up and erasing things, right? So whereas government just has no concept of this, right?
None.
And the same problem now applies to the voter rolls. There is no active garbage collection. As you described it, it's passive. It should not be passive. There should be active garbage collection and rechecking of who's still around, who's alive, who moved. All that stuff should be actively pruned.
And by the way, we know they're capable of doing that because what happened today, I got 2 emails from the registrar of voters, one about this incorrect ballot measure for Santa Monica and Malibu, and another one saying, hey, here's a reminder to vote. And I also got a text saying, hey, here's a reminder to vote. We haven't gotten a ballot from you yet. So if they can go and email you multiple times a day and text you every day, can't they use the very same means to say, hey, the address we have on file for you is such and such. If you are still alive, and if this is the correct address, text back with a Y or click here in the email. If not, click N. Or if you're not alive, we're just not going to get a response from you. So we know to remove you from the rolls. This is not hard, right? They can contact you, right? They have a system. It exists. So they need to leverage that system.
Yeah, if they want to find you, they can. If you owe them $2,
Yes.
for something you did in 1979, they will find you.
Yes.
Right. So they're good at doing stuff when they really want to.
Yeah.
So okay, so just bottom line it for me. After you left the facility and after you sort of studied this problem for a little bit, do you trust? Do you, Houman? Do you trust that our elections are legitimate?
It's a bit of a loaded question, Mark.
Well, up to you how you want to answer that.
I hesitatingly trust it, if that makes sense. I'm going to qualify my trust. I trust it enough that I will go and vote. I trust it enough that I encourage everyone else to go and vote in mass via paper, mail-in ballot if that's easier for them, in person if that's easier for them, or they trust it more. Whatever you trust more, go do. But I think at the same time, in parallel with that, because they're not mutually exclusive, we do need to be vigilant, and we do need to demand that we see what's happening in that black box, as you pointed out. And we also do need to add additional layers of protection in order to really ensure the integrity of the voting systems moving forward.
Do you think we should have some sort of reboot of the election system at a national level?
Absolutely. Look, that's the only way it's going to change, because there's so many different counties and cities and states that have control over all of these things that it's going to take way too much effort, and it'll be impossible to do it on a state by state and city level. We're going to have to do things on a federal level, and the federal government can simply do that probably because there are federal elections. And if something's a federal election, presumably they should have some measure of centralized control over that.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agree with you on that. So, so before we go, I just want to read you a couple things that I went and did a little bit of research. Mm-hmm. So I used by the way, Masari was extremely helpful for this, the AI. I asked it to tell me about the 10 top election blockchain projects that are out there. Mm-hmm. And it looks like there have been a lot of people trying to do this over the years, and none of them have gotten really big traction. They all seem sort of, I think it's because government resists these things. Yeah. And I think eventually one of them will take off, but I don't know which one. But I can tell you sort of the top contender that I found was something called Votes, VOATZ. Mm-hmm. And as I was researching it, I found out that Jason Calacanis had beaten me to the punch by about 3 days. And he had interviewed Votes, the CEO, on This Week in Startups. So I went and listened to that. And that appears to be, it's all electronic blockchain voting, but it does leave a paper trail. It does use biometric verification. And I couldn't tell what blockchain it was actually on. Like, I'm like, are you doing this on Polygon? Is it on Ethereum? Like, where is it? It appears to be on Hyperledger, which is IBM's proprietary permissioned blockchain. So it's basically it's a database. Yeah. So it's not like something where like Ethereum, where it's very, very decentralized. Yeah. And in my view, I think if we're going to do this, we should do it right, and it should be on an open, very decentralized blockchain of some sort. Yes. So I do applaud the Votes people, because I think they've gotten a lot of the process and the workflow of how to do voting quite right. And the other sort of significant development I found was something called the Government Blockchain Voting Working Group. And they have a white paper online where they've sort of outlined the requirements. It's sort of like a product marketing document for how to build a blockchain-based voting system. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty good. I think there's a lot of really good thinking in that as well. So if anyone's interested in sort of the state of the art of blockchain voting, I'd refer them to both of those things. So Houman, where can people find you online before we go? And do you want to plug anything? Now's the time.
They can follow me on X. It's Houman at Houman Hemati. So HoumanHemmati. My first name, last name, sandwiched together.
Yeah, and that'll be in the show notes. So
great.
All right, man. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your thought.
This was fun.
Yeah, this is great. So my name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see everybody next time.